one more minute before we dive into the content, but I'll just take this opportunity to say hello, good morning, and welcome. Pretty excited. I'm personally excited about the content we're going to discuss today. I think, on the cover of most every business section of every newspaper, local and national, there's some conversation related to what we're going to talk about today, which are the impacts of remote work on just about everything that drives a local economy, whether it's starting out with, talking about office vacancies or the impacts on retail or, property tax base, worker preferences, employer preferences. We're going to get into all of it today. And we're going to talk about what local leaders at the city and economic development organization level can be, should be, ought to be doing, what's working, what's not. And, we're going to get into all of that in just a second. So let me just first take this opportunity to say hello and introduce myself. I'm Ian Ross. I'm the head of Civic here at Placer AI, and thrilled to be joined by so many of you still signing up. And for those of you who are not familiar with Placer, we leverage the power of observing the movement of mobile devices, right? So we watch the movement of tens of millions of mobile devices across the US. And from that, we can garner really incredible insights about the choices that people make, where they go, where they spend their time, how they get there, which stores they frequent, which hotels they stay in, how they travel. And when you look at it more through a lens of the city scale or the district scale, we can start to see the behaviors of employees. Are they returning to certain districts, CBDs? How are they getting there? How often are they coming? How much time are they spending? Are they still going to the retailers that they used to frequent before remote work, et cetera, et cetera? And the way that our civic clients, be they cities and chambers of commerce or Center City District, use our data is for a wide variety of economic development goals, ranging from retail recruitment and looking at events to everything from considering who the best tenant mix might be for a given area, looking at travel and tourism, thinking about the recovery of COVID and understanding which subverticals of your economy are working well and which ones are still continuing to struggle. A lot of supporting of local businesses and workforce development. And we're currently working with about 500 civic organizations, be they government, economic development across the country. And thrilled to see so many of you joining now. But more so than that, I'm very, very pleased to be joined by two not only experts in the field, but people who are working day in, day out on this very issue, which is the transformation of city centers that is really, that we're in the throes of. And they are Ted Egan, who is the chief economist for the city and county of San Francisco. Hello, Ted.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining us. And of course, Paul Livey, who is not only the founder, but is currently the CEO and president, and I believe sort of has already put in place a transition plan. So we are thrilled to be joined by Paul, who leads the Center City District for Philadelphia. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, this is just a wonderful opportunity and something that the folks at Placer have been looking at from the data standpoint, and now we're thrilled to have two practitioners who are working diligently in this space. So let's just jump right in. So I'm going to start with some very, very basic questions just about visitation of employees back to our district. So Paul, I know you're doing this work day in and day out. We've read your reports, we see your publications, incredible amounts of progress to report, but at the end of the day, we're still looking at the numbers of employees that are coming back to Center City on the daily, still down about 30%, right? From where we were. I don't know if that number is exactly what you're seeing. That's what we're seeing, 30% or so from where we were pre-pandemic times. And you've been the CEO of Center City District since 1991. You've seen plenty of boom and bust cycles, I'm sure. What are you seeing today in terms of how remote work is impacting Center City District from the standpoint of employees returning to town, and what do you think the trajectory looks like going forward?
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's a great question. I think,
your opening comment about economic cycles, I think, is really important. We live in an economy that has periods of rapid expansion and periods of contraction. And in every period of contraction I've been through, at the bottom, everybody is absolutely pessimistic and think the world is coming to an end. So we've got to kind of put that in context here. We've been through a couple of cycles. When we started the district in 1990, 1991, it was at the bottom of the economic cycle. People were incredibly pessimistic about the downtown and its future. And clearly, both national economic trends changed and things that we did and our impact changed. But I would say the most important thing is that our downtown and most downtowns in 1990 were primarily office districts. And all of us, I think, who have been working in and around downtowns have seen a remarkable diversification. So while you're right, we're at about 65, 70% of workers back. We have 119% of the residents that we had before the pandemic, and we're at about 77% of visitors and tourists. So one, I think downtown diversification in some sense mitigates some of that situation. I think lots of people are still working very hard on return to work. And you're right, that line you're showing is similar to ours. We're using your data, no surprise, but it's a gradual and slow return. And so my continual message is we have not plateaued. And that anybody thinks that today is the new normal is probably going to be wrong.
Yeah.
Whether we get back to a 5-day week, that's questionable at this moment. But right now in Philadelphia, we've got 44% of our firms at a 3-day week and 23% at a 5-day week. So it really matters by industry. I'll come back to that point later.
Yeah.
But I think clearly remote work, your basic question, the technology has allowed a lot of untethering from work. And clearly lots of employees got very comfortable working in their pajamas. And any perk that is extended is very hard to take back. But from the point of view of innovation, creativity, productivity, and mentoring of particular younger employees, there are real downsides to remote work. So we can come back to that, but let me stop there.
Yeah, no, Ted, I'm going to grab Paul's comment about the pajama set of people. And, unlike Philadelphia, downtown San Francisco, notably the financial district, is still predominantly an office land use set, right? So Ted, we're hearing about the horror stories, the doom loop, right, for San Francisco. I know you've been asked this question probably 12 times a day for about the last 2.5 years. But let's just start with some basic numbers. San Francisco still sort of leading the nation, you might say, in terms of lack of recovery, but that might be another way of saying leading the nation in terms of opportunity, right? There is a huge percentage of the office workers, 50 some odd percent, that are still not coming on the daily basis. So has San Francisco stabilized, or are we still in a downward spiral? What are you seeing?
Well, let me offer a little bit of contrast about San Francisco to other places before we dig into that. You mentioned that San Francisco is still primarily an office center. It's actually a different story. In 1990, San Francisco was more diversified downtown than it is now. The dynamics of the Bay Area economy, of which San Francisco is at the core, is just extremely strong economically fundamental, and that's translated into massive demand for office space over the last 30 years. In San Francisco, during the 2010s, was, along with Austin, the fastest growing city in the United States, and we added 170,000 jobs, mostly office jobs, without building very many new office buildings, just cramming people in there. So there was a fantastic economic force to create a very strong concentration of office activity in San Francisco, and office industries are now 80% of our economy. So then the pandemic hits, and there's a major change in how 80% of our economy is organized spatially. That's going to have a massive implication for San Francisco, and it's going to lead to a bigger adjustment for us than a lot of similar places. But to answer your question, I don't think the evidence points to a downward spiral. I don't see things still going down in San Francisco, and generally things are going up even in downtown. The indicator I look very closely at is sales tax. And over the past year, we've seen pretty good growth in most of the northeast sector of the city where the office buildings are. We have a problem around Union Square, which is our major retail area, our destination retail area. And there are a little bit of dynamics there of unraveling that we need to worry about. But for downtown as a whole, no, I'm not worried that things are going to stay this way forever.
Yeah, I was in downtown San Francisco yesterday morning, I was thrilled to see, and actually a little bit surprised, over by Howard and I guess Maine, a new coffee shop opening right across the street from Starbucks, but a local coffee shop saying coming soon. And then there was another lunch place that had the grand opening sign going on. So, and that's, to me, that's even more of what I think of more of as like the residential, you know, by Rincon Towers, that area, like it's even more of a residential edge of the financial district getting down to the Embarcadero, but it seems like there's a lot of energy picking up. So let me just let's talk about the doom and gloom for one more minute, and then we'll switch the tone. Philadelphia's market, especially the sort of, maybe not the A office building, but the sort of the areas that weren't seeing all the investment in the last 10 years, still struggling to recover. We see the headlines, right? San Francisco office vacancy near gasp, 30% in the first quarter. So we took a look using Placer data at some of, you know, the sort of iconic buildings, right? And this is kind of convenient. I think I was sort of fortunate because there was an announcement this morning from Mark Benioff about a new incentive. But looking at the Salesforce Tower, employee visits still 60% what they were in January 2020. Comcast Tech, our technology center. Now I know there's a Four Seasons hotel in there. I think there is sort of, you know,
correct. That's right.
Floors or so. Employee visits still down. So what are you hearing from your big employers, Paul? What are you hearing from your big property owners? What's happening in the commercial real estate industry in Philadelphia? Are office leases picking back up? Are you more focused on the conversion, which I know is more possible right now in Philadelphia than in other places?
Well, let me go back a half step, because office buildings are not all the same in all cities based on who fills them up. And there are cities like San Francisco, highly dependent on technology, New York, highly dependent on financial services. And those two industries tend to be the most remote industries.
Yeah.
Let's just go to cities that are highly dependent on hospitality. Memphis, Nashville, San Antonio are in the 65 to 70% range.
Yeah.
And some of those office tenants are serving that. So the mix of industries is also a factor here. It's not just office in general. And we're happen to be fortunate in the fact that Comcast, who is our prime technology company, has set a path to come back. But to answer your question, I think in the commercial real estate industry, people are now talking about the flight to quality, those well-capitalized buildings that have been able to invest in all the amenities that we need to have. I don't want to call it the office's playpen, that's too far, but the office with lots of amenities to make it enjoyable to be in are attracting tenants. They're leasing into the mid 90% range. And here's a big difference between San Francisco and Philadelphia is, yes, our B and C buildings have been challenged. As Ted said, the demand was so strong there. I went around when I was there 2 weeks ago saying, oh, let's look at all these older buildings that could be converted. They're all filled with office. So very, very different marketplace conditions. But in our case, the A buildings, the so-called trophy buildings, are doing quite well. If you're a building that's 60% or 50% occupied and you've got a lender breathing down your neck, those owners are as depressed and desperate as possible. And they're negotiating with their lenders, and lots of city governments are figuring out how to step in. So again, the type of industry, the class of building, and the broader market matter here. But we're seeing by no means as robust leasing as pre-pandemic, and lease sizes are smaller. People are still being more tentative, but we're still seeing in the A buildings really strong interest. We've been converting vacant buildings since 1998. So we took 9 million square feet of inventory out of downtown and converted it to housing and hotel. But we've got some of those 1970s and 80s buildings, which are facing a bit of challenge right now. Some of them are easily convertible, some aren't. So I would just urge that you got to look very uniquely at the real estate and the markets in each city.
Ted, I know you didn't have to peek into the dugout to know this one was coming. I just took a shot at my own team. We just saw, you know, the headlines are everywhere. Wells Fargo finally is divesting 550 California. The question that I want to have to pick up on Paul's comment, Ted, is not So much about the leasing, but let's face it, I think I didn't do the math exactly, but sort of back of envelope math, I think they're probably getting 130, 140 a square foot or something like that for the sale of this building, which they were originally asking 450 a square foot. So is this the reset? Is this the new comp in San Francisco? Are we at 50% valuation, 40% valuation? And if so, and I do promise we will shift this conversation to optimism and strategies. I just want to lay the groundwork. Is the line out the door, right? Is everybody coming to town and saying you have to reappraise? We can no longer pay the tax. We shouldn't pay the tax that we once did. Look what Wells Fargo did.
Well, the question about tax in California is a little more complicated, but let me talk about the fundamentals. I mean, generally, I think what you're suggesting is right, and it's the economic response you would expect to a drop in demand. Prices have to fall. You're talking about this one building that's about to close. There was a reported close to sale of another building down the street with the reported sale price at 77% below where it was valued before the pandemic. So that's actually really bad, obviously, if that's your investment. And you don't want to minimize the pain that that's having on investors and what that does for the climate of investing in the city. But from the overall city economy, it's probably what has to happen. The buyer of the building I was referring to is an office manager, and they're going to put more per square foot into renovating the building than they're actually paying for it for the property, and it's going to come out at extremely high quality space, and they're going to have the flexibility to charge a very competitive rent for it. So I think that is the way the market is going to adjust, and that's how we're going to refill down. That's a big part of, I think, how we're going to refill downtown. Not getting back the people who were working there in 2019, but attracting new tenants with a more attractive price.
Let me stick with you on this one, Ted, and then we'll jump back to Paul. Ted, you and I had lunch a few weeks back, a very lovely bowl of ramen in downtown San Francisco. Place looked pretty busy to me. It was a Friday afternoon. However, when you see these sorts of occupancy numbers, right? When you see these sorts of, how many people aren't here today who were once here, end of the day, it's got to be impacting the local retailers, right? Like, it's hard to believe that, let me go to San Francisco real quick, that the retailers can do today what they did then. So when we looked at Placer data for a few of the restaurants in downtown, right? I'm looking at Tender Greens, Lamar, and Starbucks. We're seeing, when we isolate the data in Placer for just employee visits, right? We look at the employees to the district and we say, of the employees coming to the financial district, let's take a look at the restaurants they're going to now and benchmark it to January 2020. And you can see some of them are climbing back. They all seem to be coming back, which is a very positive sign. I think you alluded to that earlier, but the numbers still aren't there to what they were. So how can the restaurants, the dining establishments, the bars, the eateries, the entertainment, the places where employees used to spend money every day, are they surviving? Have they right-sized? What are you seeing in terms of those impacts? What are you hearing from the local business owners?
I'll answer that, but I have a question about this. Are you talking about employees at the restaurant or?
No. I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah, employee. So with Placer data, what we did is we looked at the employees coming to offices in the downtown, in the financial district, and then looked at what we call favorite places, which is where are they going to eat? Where are they going to shop? And how does that compare to 2020? So the numbers you're seeing on the screen right now are people who work in the financial district visiting these local restaurants.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think those numbers are sort of in the right ballpark compared to 2020. And, they're basically, the story of the last 3 or 4 years is really two stories. How bad was your shutdown and what does your post-shutdown recovery look like? Our shutdown was really, really bad, and our post-shutdown recovery has been really, really slow. And the only kind of optimistic spin I could put on it is it could be way down and then continuing to fall. And that doesn't seem to be happening.
Yeah.
I would just mention when it comes to restaurants, and I asked my question about restaurant employees, restaurants have two problems. They have a lack of customers and they have a labor shortage. Because a lot of low-income workers, restaurant workers who were laid off in 2020 moved out of San Francisco, and wage growth is very high in that sector.
Yeah.
So it's a sector that's done well in the last few months, but it still has a long way to go because of those headwinds.
Yeah, and a little further in the conversation, I'm going to try to bring that back to the idea. Well, I think you know where it's going, which is if the housing demand of the certain higher income folks is decreased, are we creating new opportunities for other folks to move back into the core? Is this like the inverse of that? But Paul, let's talk about the retail situation in Philadelphia and the impact of the employee visits. So looking at the Chick-fil-A, Ruby Buffet, Marathon Grill, and even, we looked at, I think, 40 or 50 of the local dining establishments and whether or not people who work in Center City are visiting those at the same number as they once were. We're seeing about a 34% fall off. We're not quite there, right? Like 76% of the, let me say it, restaurants are seeing about 76% of the customers that they did in January 2020 from people who come to the district to work.
Yeah, and again, I would go to what's the composition of the total downtown, because again, we really love using your numbers and we really value them tremendously. Our numbers, your numbers for Center City prior to the pandemic was on a daily basis. We had about 225,000 visitors, shoppers, tourists, and conventioneers.
Right.
We had about 160,000 office workers, and we had 70,000 residents. So note that office workers are second. We're second in category. So again, yes, there is a drop in office workers going to retail, but visitors, tourists, and conventions, we're fully back at our convention center to pre-pandemic levels. We have more residents than we had beforehand. So multiple sources of demand keep downtown retail and restaurants alive. Now, I know you want to ask me about this. I mean, clearly as a downtown improvement district, we're totally focused on both how to get people back to work and promotion of downtown restaurants and retail. So we have twice a year restaurant weeks, which we're promoting restaurants. We're in the middle of what we call our Center City Sips, which is happy hour after work. We just started this week. We had a 14% increase in pedestrians coming to those restaurants over the week before. So there are macro trends which we're responding to. And I know you want to get to this later, a lot each of us can do in our own downtown. So we've got to capitalize on the foot traffic that's there. But I'll also talk in a moment about everything we're doing to get office workers back.
Yeah. And we will get to like all of the great strategies. Right. I want to pick up on the comment that Ted made about the people leaving town. So here is the great donut that everyone is referring to. I took it upon myself to choose a strawberry glazed version of it. And the typical story that we hear about, the donut effect is everything the core is missing, right? Today, right? Which was, there was initially sort of an exodus of the core, right? Everybody was concerned about the virus. Let's not be in such great proximity to one another, right? And then there was this economic shock. Suddenly we have this technology-enabled remote work situation. And now even today, there's this, I'll go with spiraling, right? If the thing that drew everybody to the core was the fact that there were people in the core and it was an exciting, bustling place to be, and those people aren't there, does it sort of self-perpetuate, right? Are tourists no longer psyched to come downtown because it used to be this interesting, bustling environment and people aren't there? And are employees not getting the sort of reward that you get from being around each other if there aren't too many people around? And then the housing benefits. Well, if I can get more square foot for my money, right? And I can live a distance that in the past, if I had to come downtown 5 days a week was a bit problematic, but now, hey, I'm only coming downtown 3 days a week, right? So now my cost of commute over the course of a year or 15 years is 40 or 60% of what it once was. And now I'm willing to take that cost because my kids get a yard, I get all the benefits of the suburbs, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the donut, right? That we're all talking about. And if you take that 30,000 square foot view, employees are incentivized to no longer live as close as they once chose, right? It's a choice. They can live a little further away, get a little more for their money, and they're only coming downtown 3 days a week. So to you, Ted, does the concept of place as the organizing principle of work still hold true, right? Let me add one thing to that. When I was coming out of college, when folks were coming out of college just a few years ago, you made decisions based on place, right? If you wanted to get into finance, you might have moved to Manhattan. If you wanted to get into film, you moved to LA. If you were interested in tech, you were going to the Bay Area. You didn't really have a choice about it. Does that even hold true any longer? Is place still the primary organizing principle of knowledge in a remote work world?
Well, that is a very good high level question. Let me start with your first question. And just say we need to follow very closely what the people who are studying office use and the reorganization of work are telling us. And I think they're telling us, one thing that's challenging for traditional office districts like downtown San Francisco, and one thing that is, I think, a saving grace. The challenge we've talked about, the saving grace is that it's 2 days a week and not 0 days a week. And that opens up a lot of possibilities. If it was 0 days a week and we were just all living virtual lives with our VR goggles on, place wouldn't matter. That's that, your lap would replace the office district, right? Your goggles would replace an entertainment district. There's no reason to go anywhere. The internet brings everything you need to you. That's not the world we live in, the real world that we live in. And as far as offices are concerned, 2 days a week is still tying people to an office. You're pointing out here with the donut one important flow that is clearly happening. We can see it from the housing market. That people, when you say the talent redistribution, you're talking about the redistribution of where they live away from what used to be near their workplace to a place that's farther from their workplace. There's also a different talent redistribution going on that's very hard to see in the data, but it's about people leaving their jobs in low-wage areas to take hybrid or partly remote jobs in San Francisco. And I'll just give you an anecdote that we have at the city. We hire a lot of tech workers, and it's challenging to hire public sector tech workers in San Francisco. But increasingly, we're getting people who live in the Sacramento area, east of Sacramento, willing to come to San Francisco, 2 days every 2 weeks to make that hybrid office connection work. And why will they do it? Because the wages we can pay in San Francisco are higher than what they can pay in Sacramento. So there is a talent redistribution by job switching in the other direction. Both of them actually, I think in the long run, and we can talk about this if you want, reinforce the traditional office districts in the long run.
The talent redistribution is a great term. And then what comes with a talent redistribution is a transportation reset, right? Yep. And that, so there's a future reset. Transportation will trail this by some period of time, right? It used to be that people organize themselves at the confluence of rivers and where you could exchange goods and services, right? So if you exchange those goods and services 3 days a week on the internet and 2 days a week in person, there's a transportation reset. That's fascinating. And you know what? I think there's a whole webinar to be for that discussion in our future, which is what's going to happen to that next level suburb. It used to be that housing was the answer to the downtown core. Is that still even the answer? Paul, Philadelphia has taken great strides to introduce housing into the downtown core. In fact, your numbers, and I can pull them up on a future slide. Maybe I'll
leave this one up because I want to attack this donut for a moment.
You want to attack the donut? All right.
Either eat it or attack it one way or the other.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You can attack the donut, but I do want you to get to at some point in your attack of the donut, the idea of the fact that you actually have more sprinkles in the center of the donut than many downtowns.
Yeah, I want to get there. Absolutely. First of all, let me make a nasty remark about academic research on this. And this is spoken by someone who a long time ago got a PhD from Columbia, so I earned the right to be snide. All right. I think there's a lot of work out there where people publishing urban doom loops and donuts. That's right. These are a group of academics, frankly, who are so remote. I think they're disconnected from reality, as Ted has suggested, because look, even the folks out of Stanford who are publishing under the name work from home are showing that 59% of workers are on site fully and 29% are hybrid and only 12% are fully remote. So I don't want to in any way minimize those sectors and those type of industries which are fully remote, but even their own data says it's only 12% of the workforce. So let's be really clear, different types of work gets performed different ways. Clearly, technology is the poster child for remote, and San Francisco is highly dependent on that. But just to come to your point, I mean, our downtown, our former commercial core, which is the boundaries of our district, we're a bigger city than San Francisco with a far less robust office sector than they have. Ted, what do you have? Over 100 million square feet of office space, if I remember, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we're 40 million. Okay. So, but we've got in our downtown 239 office buildings. We have 236 apartment buildings, 128 condominium buildings, and 45 hotels. That's mixed use. And so our core is not empty. There was clearly a time in June of 2020, you take COVID, you take shutdown, and you take civil unrest, three separate overlapping phenomenon. And the people who lived in the core fled for about 3 to 4 months. People went to their beach homes, their mountain homes, students went back. We now have more people in the core living here than we did beforehand because the quality of place, restaurants, cultural institutions, et cetera. So place matters both for work and for residents and for amenities. And lots of people are recruiting workers because they want to live in that city or live near that city. We don't have the same hyperinflation of housing that San Francisco has, but we're enjoying people coming from New York here for greater compatibility, for lower cost. So again, I think this hole in the donut is not describing the reality in many of our cities. It's describing a portion. I'll just say, you know, I was out in San Francisco. I arrived on a Sunday about 2 weeks ago. I rented a bike, and fortunately it was a motorized one so I could go up Heads Hills. And I was stunned how vibrant the downtown was on a Sunday, and all those images on media. Yes, it described the Tenderloin. It didn't describe the Embarcadero. So I think there's a lot of misinformation and media exaggeration out there about our cities. And those of us are on the ground, we have problems, we're struggling with them, but the conditions I think are significantly better. So, okay, you wanted me to reflect on this? I sorry to go on my soapbox.
That was a good donut shot. I think, and the data actually pans out what you're suggesting. So I jumped ahead a few slides.
Sure.
For those of you looking at this, or if you look at the slide on the right, this is using Placer's new migration dashboard.
Right.
And the top graph that shows the overall population trend, you can see this is for the CBSA, right? Philly, Camden, Wilmington.
Right.
And you can see the population, even in, just post 2020, sure, you had a good dip, but you've come back and you still have your sort of moderate, I think you refer to it as the tortoise, right? That sort of moderate growth that's still going on. And in the lower right, you can see on Placer's dashboard, people coming to Philadelphia, obviously from New York City. I know you actually ran some ads on the trains.
Right, sure, absolutely.
That's right. And so bringing
what your data is not capturing is obviously age here. What we're seeing, to make a broad generalization, is younger people are coming and older people are leaving, right? And that's been a long phenomenon about cities. And people are retiring or moving out. But so long as the demographic, the kind of, millennial and group of people are still growing, and we're coming to the end of that at this point, downtowns are fertile grounds for young and single people.
Absolutely. And the data, I mean, what I'm showing in the slideshow doesn't show that data, but we can, I think you do, because I think you have access to the migration. You can look into the household incomes and the demographics.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
People. But for the most part, you have a very balanced migration in and out. Some folks going to the Southeast, but folks coming in from, you can see all those green counties across the country where folks are migrating in from. San Francisco, on the other hand, we had the fall off post 2020, but it does look like it's starting to come back, right? If you look at the far right side of the graph, we sort of hit the end of the migration outbound in 2022, and it looks like folks are coming back. And I wanted to ask Ted about this, which is what's happening inside of the rental market in San Francisco, and how do you correlate that with remote work?
Well, one of the ways, markets are basically shock absorbers. And one of the ways that the city is adjusting to remote work, and the donut effect is very real in San Francisco, very, very stark in the data, is that rents fell. Rents fell faster in San Francisco in 2020 than any other city. And our rents are still 10% below where they were before the pandemic, which, when you think about the real estate market, is bonkers. And that's going to start to tempt people. And there was just an interesting story in the New York Times yesterday about a couple who are both starting AI startups living in Bend, Oregon, where they moved to get away from the big city in 2020. And apparently they were driving from Bend to San Francisco, which is a very long way, to go to hackathons and meetups, and decided to move back to the city. Yeah. And the housing market is helping. San Francisco's, condo prices or single family home prices were 6 times the US average before the pandemic. Now they're about 4.5 times. So we're seeing significant adjustments in the relative cost of San Francisco, and it's what you would expect. Remote work removes what you're willing to pay to be right next door to that office building, because you don't need to be there every day. Right. Just like the office adjustment we were talking about, it's a little bit painful if you went long in San Francisco housing just before the pandemic, but it's a necessary part of how the city's economy has to adjust to this new reality.
Yeah, and again, I'm just looking here at Placer data on the left side, San Francisco. You can see there the blue dashed vertical line being the moment of the pandemic, January 2020, when everything started to shift. You can see the fall off in folks moving, basically out of, right? The number of folks living inside of urban places declined, but then again, sort of at mid 2021, 2022, it seems to be coming back in San Francisco. People are now sort of, the sort of tide went out, and it looks like the tide is coming back in a little bit. Philadelphia, to Paul's point earlier, sure, there was a rapid fall in 2021, but look how quickly it came back. Folks have come back and filled the donut, you might say, right? So sort of back to where you were. Okay, we've got about 20 minutes to roll here, and I want to change the script. Both San Francisco and Philadelphia and many other cities across the country have taken a step to put in place a plan, right? How are we going to climb out of this? What does it look like, right? I think Mayor Bree, it was called the roadmap, right? Roadmap to Downtown was published not too long ago. I know Paul's got study after study seems to be coming out of Center City, Philadelphia, which we love. And I want to take an opportunity to talk about what some of these, the big efforts are that are underway. And I'm going to start with Paul and the office trends. Paul, your office recently reached out to over 200 corporate and nonprofit partners, right. Asking them a little bit about what they're seeing, the tension between what employee preferences are, right, and what the employer preferences are. But I want to frame all of this next step of the discussion with just sort of an acknowledgement of the competing interests that are everywhere, right? Absolutely. Employees, like I'm working from home right now. Employees who work from home get very comfortable working from home, and they're thrilled to to be around their kids and maybe be in their pajamas, at least below the Zoom fold, right? And then the employers, they want to accommodate the employees, and they want to remain competitive, right, and have the best talent. And then you have the retailers that are taking the hit, as we saw, with fewer dollars coming into the store, and then the cities taking a hit on the tax base. So a lot of competing interests going on. Curious what you found in your interviews with your corporate partners.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing this up on the screen, because if you look at the chart on the top, if you add up 3, 4, and 5 days a week, that's 76% of all respondents were back in the office at least 3 days a week. And that was a fairly strong number. And it has been steadily growing. And as you suggest, what you see is figure 6 at the bottom. What was the biggest barrier? People like their pajamas and sweatpants. They don't want to give up that perk. And it was less about safety. If you'd asked us in 2020, it would have been more about safety. We've really gotten our hands around that issue, but clearly employee preference was in one place. I don't know if you're going to flip to the next page, but we had the what the employers thought. And clearly, all right, I'll just talk about from an employer point of view. They really valued face-to-face meetings for collaboration as number 1, better ability to supervise and mentor staff, and 3, professional development for all staff. And yes, there is a gap here, and different types of firms have taken different approaches. What was most interesting in this survey is while employers clearly wanted their employees back, only about 25% had done things specifically. The other 75% wanted to know what the first 25% were doing. And clearly those employers who are recognizing that the world has changed, are adding more amenities, more programming, birthday parties, events after work, just more social life getting built into the office is clearly a new mode. What we did is set up in the lobbies of every office buildings with our police, our transit agency, and our marketing staff, and met office workers who were in, answered questions, gave out information. We're now doing parties on office plazas after work. So employees have come in, there's events. So there's an activation strategy, a promotion strategy, because in our downtown, our office district is more single use than mixed use, although it's diversified. We have probably 3 times as many pedestrians on our retail streets as we still do in our office district. So I think the employers were very eager to partner with us and the owners on activation strategies, clearly addressing public safety. We've doubled our public safety deployment on the street, and I think we've really handled that well. But I think a lot of employers are still searching. Many people were caught off guard by this change reality. Many of them are reluctant to go into this new change reality. And it doesn't mean from an employer point of view, you do everything your employees want. You need to find a new middle ground. I mean, just take an architectural firm. If their young people are working at home and are there 7 hours going down some path with no supervision, you've wasted a day of work. So there are creative industries that are incredibly collaborative, and there are industries which require a lot of work on your own. That's why this hybrid model is working. As Ted was saying, whether it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 2 days every other 2 weeks, seeing other people in the office, learning from them, and the old-fashioned thing. I walk down the hall in my office and I see a staff person. I say, "Oh my God, Colin, I forgot to ask you, where are you?" And he says, "Oh, I forgot to tell you." The random conversations that you have in your office or on the street are just key to what cities have always done. So again, I come back to the point that we are in a steady upward swing. I don't know we get all the way back, but it's not just going to be natural trends. It's going to be proactivity by local government. It's going to be business leadership. It's going to be leadership of organizations like ours. Cities are just too important to leave behind.
Yeah, just one quick follow-up there. I've heard you say once, I don't something about, I won't quote this directly, and forgive me if I hack it.
Sure.
You often make the comment that cities aren't just sort of like happenstance, right? They are the result of the intentions.
Yeah, they're acts of creation.
They're acts of creation. There,
yeah.
I knew I would hack it, and thanks.
Yeah, no problem. That's all right.
Yeah. So if they are acts of creation, a quick question, Ted. Mayor Breed released the roadmap. Is a lot of what Paul's doing, the activation, the birthday parties, is that something that's applicable in San Francisco downtown? Have there been any attempts at doing this, or are we still dealing with just the sort of reality of a workforce that's just not interested in coming back beyond TAF time?
I think it's a central part of what the mayor is talking about, and I should just let the audience know that I don't work for the mayor. I'm not a spokesperson for the mayor, but it's clear that the first strategy, ensure downtown is clean, safe, and inviting. And I was getting my hair cut downtown this week. My barber told me he'd been working downtown for 35 years. He'd never seen it so clean. So that focus is very real, and I think the context is: look, we, as a rapidly growing, bursting at the seams city 4 years ago, expected teams of teaming office workers to pour out of our subway exits and fill up our sidewalks as a part of nature. And with the reality of remote work is we need to think of those people as what they always are, which is visitors, because increasingly they're there because they choose to be there, or it's part of a negotiation with their employer, which is in some sense still being written, a social contract that's still being formed. So we need to attract commuters the same way we've been thinking about attracting visitors. And it's the same thing. What's there to do? Is it safe? Is it worth my time? And that's why really I think everything you do for downtown, it's not sector specific. It really is place specific. If you want to do things that will attract residents, great. They'll also attract tourists and office workers. Yeah. If you want to focus on office workers, great. That will improve the residential environment too.
Yeah, and Ian, let me jump in. In our downtown, 2/3 of our jobs do not require a college degree. So if we're going to talk about inclusive growth, office workers coming back means Ted's Barber has customers. It means the restaurant has customers. It means the janitors in buildings have work. It means security guards have work. It means transit people have work. And so we've got an ecosystem in the downtown in which high-skilled, high-wage jobs drive a broad range of other jobs. And both San Francisco and we have a hub and spokes transit system that converges, that makes those jobs accessible to lots of people without cars. So this is not just business self-interest. This is having inclusive economies that provide opportunity for people at all skill levels, and density and clustering of businesses has always been the best way to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, how does an employer navigate this? How does a big employer navigate this, right? So there was an article this morning. I was at Market. I think I actually built the slide. Market Watch. You know, Mark Benioff is saying we'll contribute $10 a day to a charity for every office worker who comes into the building on every day. You know, we're seeing civic organizations like I think it was Columbus, Ohio, where the chamber itself, or whatever the right organization is of business owners, they're giving, you know, $10 Wednesday coupons, right? Come downtown on Wednesday, $10 off any lunch at these, you know, 40 participating restaurants, whatever it is. We're seeing all sorts of, you know, financial incentives, everything to lure the dollars back to the downtowns. You know, we're seeing that on the private side. What else can the local leaders be doing? What can the economic development groups, the downtown organizations, the chambers, the bids, what are they doing that's working?
Well, let me just start. The obvious: issuing edicts is not going to work. We don't live in a culture of edicts, or et cetera. And I think, to me, we're at a period of radical experimentation. My message to my staff has come up with a whole range of ideas. If 7 of them are bad, but 2 of them are good. So if people are trying to offer bonuses, incentives, try anything at this moment, and you'll find the things that work, because I think everybody's incredibly certain, but they really don't know anything at all at this moment. And so we're dealing with a moving target. And so, sure, if incentives work, if free transit works, if special events work, all of those things matter, because you're not just going to issue orders to get people back. You're going to have to induce people to come back. Let me just say, though, that the cities that shut down the longest have the hardest time to come back, and that's politicized in the United States. But we need to take the politics off of that, because there's cities like Melbourne, Australia, which were shut down for 300 days, Perth shut down for 80 days, and it's a huge difference. So all I'm saying is a lot of this is in our control, and kind of radical experimentation, to me, is the watchword of the day.
Yeah. Ted, love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, it certainly can't hurt, and I don't think anybody knows the right answer. I tend to think a good role for the public sector is to make sure it's providing public goods that people expect at a very high level. We don't see a path where it makes sense to pay people to come back to downtown and then take that money away from clean and safe. Like, it's better. That's what city governments do. We take tax money, we provide goods, cost effectively for everyone, and that's our niche. Employers have a range of tools, from ordering people back to the office, which some do, to the vouchers and the other things. And like I say, it's being negotiated. I think it's true in San Francisco, because it's a center of tech, and people go there because they really are ambitious. They're thinking not just about, I like my pajamas, but they're thinking about their careers. And I think it makes us a kind of place where we could reach a tipping point that is sort of even beyond control of government, where the tech community just says, you know what, I'm getting too much from doing this in person. I just got to be there again. And then we start to flood back.
It sort of raises the whole idea of downtown as we work, right? I mean, is the idea that the people who don't want to work from home but need to and want to be around others just choose cities, and that's always been the case, right? Yeah. I mean, that's always been the reason people choose cities. It does raise an interesting question, though. Again, on the sort of civic side, right, or the government side, there's an economic development organization working with Placer right now in the Midwest, and they have spent over decades, they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars incentivizing different companies to come to their city, right? It's a big part of it's a regional EDO, and it's a big part of what they do. They go out there with incentives, whether it's land or energy or water or just tax sharing or whatever it is, and they say, you're going to create X thousands of jobs. That's this half of the ledger. And over here, we're going to give you these things, right? On the other half of the ledger to do that and to come to our community. Fast forward a few years, the incentives are burned, right? The money's gone, but suddenly those jobs aren't spending in the downtown any longer, right? They're living in the houses and they're not coming to the downtown. So now you've got this economic development organization in a pretty sort of prickly situation, which is, hey, we made a bet here, which was you were going to bring X hundreds of jobs or X thousands of jobs, and it was going to benefit our local businesses. And we made that investment, right? So now they're in a tough spot.
I can see that's a problem. I mean, San Francisco doesn't have the history of incentivizing people to come here because, the underlying growth of Silicon Valley tech phenomenon has been so strong. Our problem has been not enough infrastructure for the growth we have and not the other way around. But it's a similar situation. We are incredibly concentrated in tech by the end of the last decade, and tech was the industry that most adopted remote work. So it's going to lead to a painful adjustment for us in the medium term on a lot of levels.
But I would go back to what Ted said before. Look, clean and safe is essential. Quality amenities, of housing that's affordable for people at all different levels. Cities are about serendipity. Cities are about discovering things you didn't know about. You're not going to find out living out in the woods. I mean, I've lived in the woods. I loved it, but I outgrew it. But clearly there are huge competitive advantages of cities. Are there times where subsidies are appropriate? Absolutely, to get something going, but you don't subsidize an economy into existence. You've got to have the competitive assets. I mean, my one takeaway being out in San Francisco, apart from anything else, is sitting by the bay and saying, God, this is a beautiful city, right? I mean, there are just core natural competitive instincts. Our competitive strength is a historic downtown that's walkable, diverse, and mixed use. Every city's got to find its unique strengths and really reinforce those and get rid of the negatives. And there are negatives that all of us are dealing with, and we need to address them in a responsible way. So yes, incentives at rare moments, but you've got to have the basic competitive and quality of life to be attractive to anyone.
100%. I just, in recognition of the time, I want to address some of the questions. We've had a bunch of questions that are coming in from our participants. The first one, that's actually a really interesting comment.
I had a former student I saw who wants their grade raised. I think I'm sorry, Jill.
Flooding the comments. That's right. You're paid participants. Let me go to this one. So, which is an alternative strategy to giving incentives. Actually, Paul, you just addressed that. Okay, quick question. This is directly to you, Ted, from Richard Seligman. What's the story with retail sales and rent, specifically Union Square? You mentioned it. We've heard stories about, large department stores closing, large retailers closing, whether that was tied to the fact that they're not getting enough visits from employees, sort of TBD. Can you speak a little bit to the sort of retail situation that you refer to?
Well, I think you're referring to one area of San Francisco, Union Square, which is a destination retail area. And it had, I would say, three big pillars before the pandemic. It had commuters, it had hotel guests, because all of the hotels were nearby, and it had its own kind of foot traffic because there was a unique collection of retail opportunities, so people from around the city and around the Bay Area would come to it. So the office workers we talked about. In San Francisco, a lot of the tourism was conventions and business related. And so our hotels are also slow to recover, and our hotel occupancy is low. And so the retailers have lost from that source. And then you've had, the sort of chicken and egg you can get into with retail districts where a business closes, it's hard to get a new business established, and the foot traffic declines for that. So Union Square, I think, is kind of a special problem in the downtown sector of San Francisco. It's not a gigantic part of the city's economy as a whole, but it is an important retail area, and it's an important part of the tourism product in the city, and we do need to get it right. But I would say it's more challenged than the rest of downtown.
Are you seeing interest from, as I mentioned, I yesterday saw a few coming soon signs. Would you say retail is stabilized in the city? Are we seeing retail growth? Are we seeing the opening of new local businesses? Are entrepreneurial retail? Is that happening?
It's happening. It's happening not quite at the level, the new business formation that we were seeing before the pandemic, when you always have a churn. I think the macro drivers we're going to need for Union Square and other retail in the city is we're going to need stability in the office market and in hotels, and and housing. So we need to get the population back. We need to see the office market adjust and get those buildings filled again. And then I think that's going to make it easier for the retailers there. We're also getting very serious about, is our downtown malls really the future of the space? Is that what retail is really gonna be like? You know, some of those properties are several decades old and may need to be a rethink. And so there's going to be, I think, a lot of conversations about conversion in that area.
Yeah. And before you jump to other questions, let me just append one thing. This question you have up there about incentives, and I sort of argued about limited use, but abatements are a very different thing that a lot of cities are doing. Can you abate certain taxes? Can you waive certain regulations during a transition period of time so that you're not giving away revenues, but you're forgoing revenues in return for return later? It's a larger conversation, but I want to distinguish between cash incentives and abatements or forgiveness of certain regulations.
Got you. I think we're right there at the end of the time. So I want to give each of you an opportunity to close. Paul, I see from your student, Jill, or your former student, that Morgan Lewis is going through with the project. It sounds like that's a big arrow in your quiver. Do you want to speak to that and leave on sort of a note of optimism and tell us?
Sure. I mean, that's a major law firm who was thinking about doing a new building. The pandemic hit and they decided to proceed with the new building. And clearly the new building is much richer with amenities and is designed for the new world. And their older building will likely become an apartment building or a condo in the near future. So, you know, again, there's been a disruption. There's certain forms of retail that's doing really well. As Ted said, if you're on the owning side with a radical plunge in value, it's really devastating. If you're on the buying side, it's a huge opportunity. So going back to where we started from, this is a cyclical economy. We've hit a very profound down with lots of new variables, but every time we've been in these, the cycle has come back up. There's been a new reality, and every prediction of doom has proved to be false. So I'm quite optimistic. The world will change. It will be different, but creative and competitive cities figure out what those new opportunities are.
100%. And I myself, you know, I've been in Bay Area for 22 years now. I mean, I've seen a couple of cycles myself, right? We saw the tech bubble. I've seen empty BART trains and standing room only BART trains. I've seen that time and time again. So Ted, $140 a square foot seems like it's a buying market. Somebody's going to do very, very well timing this just right, because they'll be back at 450 in no time. So what's the optimistic lens the chief economist can share with us today?
Well, I don't know when we'll get back to the pre-pandemic asset values, because I do think there's something structural and permanent about this. I don't think office workers are ever going to be spending that much time in the office. And we're just going to have to figure out ways in office centers to accommodate more people who are there less often. And I think that's kind of the future of office space. I'm optimistic about in the Bay Area, San Francisco, as an office center, because I think remote work really addresses what our long-run impediments to growth have always been, which is our housing is too expensive, we don't have enough office space, and our transportation is always congested. We definitely don't have an office shortage anymore. We're going to always have a lot of office for the foreseeable future. People are moving further away. People are working more remotely, and the housing pressure isn't what it used to be. And you know, when you're only on the roads or the trains 2 or 3 days a week, every employee that you add has less of an impact on the infrastructure. So it really poises, assuming we can get through this adjustment period, which is not going to be painless. But assuming we can do that without going off the rails, I'm very optimistic about the future of San Francisco and the Bay Area.
Yeah, I am too. I want to take this opportunity to just express my thanks to both you, Ted and Paul. You know, I think that this is hopefully the beginning of a conversation. You know, we're on the data side, so we love to talk trends, but you've got the ground truth about what's really happening out there from the personal and with sort of your finger on the pulse of what the asset owners, the employers, and the local politicos are thinking about. So maybe we can continue this conversation. I would love that. And I'll just take this opportunity to thank all the participants and everyone watching. You know, all the data I showed today being used by so many civic organizations to examine the trends of downtown, to understand the impacts on the local economy of remote work. Happy to share that with you, and you can sign up at placer.ai. And with that, just thanks again. It's hard on the hour, so I'll just end the webinar now. And thank you so much to all the participants and your questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but all very wonderful questions. Have a great day.